Yeah, yes, ma'am. I appreciate you asking that, and I sense great support among the board for that. But all the things that we described to you today, other than the action we specifically ask you to take, we can take within the plan that's already approved. And not only does it fit within that plan, you know, we have to get approval from the State Department of Education for our reopening plan, and we have a every 2-week review of that. And there is nothing in our discussion. We actually had that review yesterday afternoon, and there was nothing that caused concern with that review with us continuing to move forward. That might be helpful for you to have that news as well, and thank you so much for the comments that you made.
And on the 10 days, now I know that we said within our plan that we are going to make sure that parents have a 10-day time to adapt and take care of having daycare, or hopefully if we move in a direction not having to have daycare. So in that 10 days, you said we would expect to hear from you within the next 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Then would that be another 10 days, or could we expect in the most glorious fashion that we could hear from you sooner, and then that would still give the parents 10 days? Or are we still holding to parent notification being 10 days?
Well, I'll phrase it a little differently. I believe what we say in our plan and what we've said publicly, we'd like to give you 2 weeks' notice, right, to give you 10 days. We would commit to 5 calendar days, but if there were dramatic changes, now this was more envisioned that there was some dramatic negative change, that we might do it with less than 5 days' notice. So what we would try to do with this would be to stick with the 5 calendar days. Now, most of that, again, was designed with the idea that we might have to move in a more restrictive way because of an outbreak, which to me, it's more difficult for someone to make arrangements to go backwards than to go forward. Other than perhaps some isolated incidents with transportation, i.e. you're providing your own, I would think parents would not require a significant amount of notice to say, hey, next week we're gonna go to 5. But I think probably the way we're going to do that, other than with those career and technical group 2 students, we're probably going to have a day or 2 of practice, so to speak. So that might be on a Friday. So they might know on a Monday, hey, this Friday we're going to bring you in a small group. But again, that's not an overall change to the plan. That's just a change to groups within the plan. So we would do that in the way that is most expedient. And if a parent had some difficulty with that, we would certainly work with that individual parent when we're moving in a direction where we're bringing them in or desire to bring them in more often rather than less often.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Ms. Grayson, you'd like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate us trying to get back to 5 days as soon as possible and going beyond merely considering the DHEC guidelines. My questions are, when we get back to 5 days, especially at the lower grade levels, and these plans I understand probably being made while we speak, but kindergarten classrooms, traditionally the kids are on a mat on the floor playing with numbers and letters. Are the configurations that we're looking at, do they have children in desks, or are we looking at maybe circles on the floor or dots, or what are we considering for a kindergarten classroom to look like once we get back 5 days?
That is what we have tasked initially those 9 principals with doing, and then we'll expand it to the larger group. However, what you describe, while that's the best practice, it may not be practical in maintaining the 6 feet. We believe that getting students in place 5 days a week is far more important than the consideration of the configuration of the room, although we will take that into account.
So are the 4 and 5-year-olds going to need to be 6 feet apart?
Yes.
Okay.
necessarily, but they need to be configured in the way that most facilitates the majority of work that the teacher will have them doing.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you send us a list of those pilot elementary schools?
Certainly.
Okay. And what's the timeline on their getting back to facilities with their considerations?
They don't have a timeline with facilities. I have a timeline with them that they're coming back to meet with us, that is, senior leadership, tomorrow. That's their first report back. Then when they come back tomorrow, based on what they say, then we'll establish deadlines going forward from that. Because at some point, we have to move from the 9 to the 51. The purpose of the 9 isn't necessarily simply to bring some students in and try this out. It's for them to establish what this can look like, how many different options there are, then for them to share that with the entire group, again, of total of 51 elementary principals. Then they have to each develop their own plan that aligns with the configuration of their building and the resources that they have within it. So one of the reasons we selected certain principals had to do with their facility being representative of not just their school, but multiple school locations.
Okay. Well, I think that's great news. I look forward to hearing from them. I believe that I heard you say that if this board voted today to go back 5 days a week, the protocols could not be followed.
They absolutely could not.
And the teachers, to Mr. Meek's point, the teachers who said that they would be willing to teach in the classroom at the beginning of the year did so under the assumption that the protocols would be in place.
Yes, ma'am. I believe if I heard the whole thing, there was a little interruption there, but if I heard correctly, our employees returned under the assumption that those protocols were in place, and I would agree with that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My understanding is that there's a joint resolution in the Health Education Committee that would mandate every school in every district in the state go back to 5 days a week.
My understanding, I have not read the resolution in its entirety. My understanding is it would require the option to be available to parents. Now, it does not define what option that would be, how many options there would be, how many parents that would apply to. For example, we are aware of there are districts in this state that have done a 5-day in-person, but they have capped how many parents can do that based on their ability to socially distance within that model. So it would be purely speculative at this point for me to speak to that. I know that Mr. Webb, our general counsel, is reviewing that document. I don't think he's had opportunity to fully review it, but he's reviewing it. If it is a joint resolution, I believe if it goes through that entire process, it could have the effect of law, but I would suspect that it's not quite at that point yet. As you indicated, it's been referred to a committee for their consideration at this point, a House committee, if I recall correctly.
Yes, it's in the House Education Committee. So I have read it, and it is pressed as a joint resolution. And if it passes out of committee and passes both chambers of the Congress, of the legislature, it would have the force of law. So my question is, and you may not be able to answer this fully, but I think it's worth this board considering. What impact would that have on our district employees?
I would first say to you that it would depend on the interpretation of the specific language in the resolution. Does that mean that your district has to have one first grade 5-day option, one second grade, one third grade? Or does it mean literally that every parent in the district has to have the option of having their child attend 5 days in person? Those two interpretations would have very different impacts on our district and other districts. So I think at this point, other than to say to you, if that interpretation is every parent must have the option of sending their child to school 5 days a week, I do not see any way that logistically we can do that in our district and maintain the safety and health protocols that we have in place to protect students and employees.
Okay.
Any other questions, Ms. Grayson?
Just one, if teachers have concerns, can they contact their representative in the teacher forum?
Their teacher forum representative is the teacher of the year. They can share their thinking with them. One of the roles of being a teacher of the year is to be an active participant in teacher forum, and that is the group that we go to solicit the opinions, the ideas, and to obtain reaction from in areas that we're considering, whether that be instructional, administrative, whatever else. They become the voice of teachers, very much like we use the inter-high council to be the voice for students in the district.
And I think that's a very valuable resource for teachers to let the administration know their frustrations, their concerns, and actually get them addressed by the administration. How many times have you met with teacher forums since March, just ballpark here?
I believe 4, just
Okay.
might have been more than 4, but 4.
The last time was last Friday.
Yes, Friday.
We'll continue to meet with the teacher forum throughout this until we're back 5 days a week, face to face.
Yes, I normally meet with the teacher forum. They meet once a month. There's a leadership group within it. They meet once a month. The entire forum meets 2 times a year. But when I've been meeting with them, I've invited the entire forum for at least 3 of those 4, and they meet by Zoom, so they don't have to come in to meet.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Grayson. Ms. Morrison Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think quite a few of my questions have been answered. I'll start with the last one. I appreciate Mrs. Grayson's question because I had a question about what we're voting on. We're voting on changing the plans, but not the rule, not changing the protocol. I appreciate the administration saying over and over that safety is first, and we want to make sure that our employees are safe. I appreciate that. Almost every question that has been asked, the administration has said, our main objective, safety first, and our employees being safe. And my question was, what would that look like? Give an example. And Ms. Grayson asked that question, and you gave that example using that first grade classroom. If they all came back, they still would have to be distance, and that may mean whatever was safe, whether it be on a mat or in a desk, but that was safety first. So I appreciate that. Also, someone asked a question about if we brought everyone back, would the virtual students be included? Did you not say that you would not have that group, but we would use the group that we're using face-to-face with bringing people,
Yes, ma'am,
everybody
because
back?
we're making our determination about being able to safely have them present based on the number of them today. And so I would imagine there might be some people that found out, well, you can go face-to-face 5 days a week. That might cause some significant number to want to come out of virtual. But again, we said to virtual parents, you're committing for the year, absent space available considerations at the semester. And right now, we have to calculate it based on who's there, and to just wholesale allow people back in would, depending on the number, if it were more than probably 1 or 2 per class, and in some cases, there won't be room for 1. It would really put a barrier up to us getting back to 5 days a week, and we don't need another barrier to that.
Absolutely, I agree. One last question. You said something about our administration or each district meets and has a 2-week review. That's every district across the state of South Carolina has a 2-week review with their plan?
Yes, ma'am, that's my understanding. Dr. Turner, not correct. Every district in the state has a 2-week review of their plan with the State Department.
Yes, ma'am. I think we were on a conference call yesterday with State Department officials reviewing our plan with them and our thinking going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marson Fair. Mr. Suddeth.
One question, Dr. Royster.
Yes, sir.
Who will have to make the decision to open K through 12 for 5 days a week? And I'm looking at starting with the governor, the State Department, State Superintendent, our own superintendent, the school board, teachers and parents and students. Specifically, I would just like to know who has to make that decision.
Right now,
Numbers have to, or those people mentioned are the ones that have to make the decision.
right now, absent that resolution passing, the sole decision to open or not could only be made by either this body, by me, as we do with the inclement weather. Now, I would make more short-term decisions. You would make more long-term decisions. Or, as I understand it, by virtue of the authority given to the state superintendent by the legislature for responding to the COVID-19. So none of the other people that you mentioned at this point can make that decision. The legislature can enact statutory requirements on any school district or any other political subdivision of the state, but they'd have to act as a whole body.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Suddeth?
No. Are you saying, Dr. Royster, the decision will be made by the state superintendent and the legislature?
Right now, the decision would be made in this room. It could be made by the state superintendent or by an act of the entire General Assembly.
Who will make that decision? Not what could, who will make that decision?
And now we're making it. You all are making it.
We, as a school board, can vote today, or let's say vote in the very near future, open all our schools back, K through 12, for 5 days a week.
Yes, sir. You can do that. You have the legal authority to do that.
Okay.
If you were to do that, it would obviously not be, as I know you're aware, wouldn't be in accord with the protocol set forth by the Department of Health and Environmental Control.
If we're looking at DHEC, they're going to have to say we no longer need social distancing, mask, temperature checks, or wash your hands.
Well, the biggest thing that prevents us from doing that is the parameter of having 6 feet of social distancing. And the fact that if you're inside that 6 feet, even if you're wearing a mask, to somebody that's positive, you have to quarantine.
Well, as long as we have social distancing, we'll never be back normal. So,
That, yes, sir. I think that sort of a short note to say, yes.
so we as a school board can decide we're going to do away with social distancing and return back to normal school.
You could take that action. I don't think there's a legal prohibition against you doing that. You then would be accepting the responsibility of having made that decision, which, while there might not be a statutory requirement that you maintain 6 feet, then I believe, and it would certainly be a question for Mr. Webb to respond more fully to, and likely in executive session, you open yourself up to liability because you have acted contrary to the advice of the State Agency for Public Health. But again, that would be something more in Mr. Webb's wheelhouse to opine.
If the state superintendent legislature makes that decision, then we're back to normal. But if they don't make that decision, then we can make that decision.
Yes, sir.
But if we make that decision, then we're subject to having broken some law.
That you're subject to having broken a law, but you're subject to the liability of not having followed the public health advice. So you create you could potentially create a liability for the district by doing so, in addition to what concern I know that you would have for the safety of our employees and our students.
So when it is safe to do so, it has to say when it is safe to do so.
Well, certainly we would say that it's safe to do so when we reach a point where we're aligned with what DHEC says is safe to do. Right now, we're aligned with what they're safe to do. We believe we can bring back pre-K, K, and 1, and these other groups we've talked about, like self-contained special ed and career and technical level 2. We believe we can bring those back and still be fully aligned with what DHEC says is a responsible way to handle this and meets their protocols.
And do you think we might be able to return to normal? By that I'm saying by the end of first semester, or this school year we won't go back.
I think it's pure.
Looking for an opinion from you, Dr. Roy.
And it's purely speculative, Mr. Sutton. It's got to get down to a very low level, and we know what the low is defined by DHEC. It would have to go to a very low level, or DHEC have to somehow change their stance, change their criteria for what's safe. Maybe they'll learn something that will cause them to change that. Or there's a vaccine developed. Not that you would have to take it, but once there's a vaccine that's proven to be effective, then that becomes totally your choice whether you took it or not. Then the decision is solely in your hand as to whether you chose to do that or not. So any of those things, and I've said that before, and I think people keyed on, I said something about a vaccine. Well, we don't require people to get vaccines. That becomes your choice unless the state compels you to do it, state government. But those would be the scenarios. It's low where DHEC has dropped that requirement, or the public health authorities have determined that requirement is no longer appropriate, or there's a vaccine, at which point that's become your choice whether you take it or not.
Who are you looking to help us make this decision?
We look directly at the guidance from DHEC because they are the state agency established for that purpose to protect public health and safety. We also get advice and input from the local health providers, primarily Prisma and Bon Secours St. Francis. And we also, on occasion, have gotten input and advice and asked questions of Medical University of South Carolina.
You were looking to DHEC.
Primarily because they are the established state agency for public health.
And then once you're satisfied with DHEC, you'll bring that back before the board.
If there were some change, some substantive change in what they provide or require or recommend, then certainly we would bring that back to you, immediately let you know of that.
You think that would, happen before the end of this semester?
Some days I would say to you that some of those things seem likely to happen sooner, and some days I'd say to you they seem likely not to happen very soon at all. It kind of depends on what the news is of that day. Some days they seem to be making tremendous progress on a vaccine, other days not. Some days there seems to be tremendous progress in people, and I think Ms. Bush made that point, people in our community have been very cooperative in doing the things that have been asked of them to reduce the spread. Then other days you read of other places where that's not happened. And you see in our neighboring state of Georgia, school systems that opened and closed within a week because they didn't follow the recommended protocols for health and safety.
How do we know, by looking at that chart that you put up, about number of that has the coronavirus that's in our school system? How do we know that?
We have reports from the families of those students, and we have the DHEC reports because the medical providers are required to report that to them. So we get information from more than one source. And we include any that would be reported in our reporting, but we do not make decisions outside of that officially reported. But we want to know, even if a student was a virtual student, we would want to know if they tested positive. Because you may recall, you can be a virtual student and participate in some activities. Or you could be a virtual student and come in, for example, to a career and technical course.
Am I correct, did you say that those in virtual school could not come back to our schools until the end of the school year?
When they signed up for virtual, they agreed to commit to virtual for a year, with the caveat they could apply at the semester, and if space were available, we would allow them to return, if space were available.
So if at the end of the first semester, it was decided or determined that we're going to open schools back up, those people that are in that program, they could not come back. I'm talking about the end of first semester.
In the first semester, if every school, in other words, if there were no restrictions,
Right.
only way we could allow that to happen was to transfer an equal number of teachers from that program over to the regular schools. Otherwise, we could end up with 40 students in a class. So I wouldn't say there's no way that could happen, but I'd say the path to that would be very difficult.
When we get these letters from parents, and some of our board members respond and answer, so the parents are asking the same thing, what we get. They want to go back to school 5 days a week.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chairman, who needs to respond to those parents? Can the school board respond to it, or does the chairman of the school board, or do all school board members?
So it's all of the above. You can respond, and I do respond to a lot of them. Or you can ask Ms. Fitzer to have someone that is professional and knows that area of expertise to respond on behalf of the district. Okay?
But I can respond and give my opinion.
Yes, sir.
My other school members have responded and given their opinion.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you.
As a further point, there was if the email or letter was also addressed to the administration, they will receive a response from the administration. Whether you respond or not, the administration will respond.
I've seen those.
Okay.
Thank you. And we have one last board member who'd like to ask a question, Dr. Cristobal O'Connor, and then we will vote on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to say that Ms. Bush covered my thinking very well. I've spoken to her many times about her absolute desire to push toward as much safe attendance as we can possibly achieve, as with my other colleagues, but she communicated well with the concerns for the entire district and communities, and so I just align myself with her remarks and say, you are bringing to us exactly what we hoped you would bring, which is the most return that we can see and still follow the guidelines. As you are looking at the early elementary, you are also following the board priorities of early reading importance, as well as we're seeing the advantages of the decisions we make along the class line and to allow for this to happen successfully. But I would just ask you, if it comes to a point of whether we can bring back second grade, and given the importance of that early reading goal, could you please have someone on your staff look into
Thank you, Dr. Ball-O'Connor. And we have one last, Ms. Goodwin Caldwell has a question. Ms. Goodwin Caldwell? Hello?
I don't see her on the list up there.
She on the phone? Ms. Fitzer, is she on her phone or? What is her question? Can you,
I'm on here now, can you hear me?
yes,
I couldn't get back to it, yes, I am on my phone. But Crystal just said what I had wanted to ask about outside classrooms, have we ever considered those? Dr. Royster?
Yes, ma'am, we have some places that lend themselves to that. They already have a covered area adjacent to the building. There are obviously some issues with going outside, that you have weather impacts, unless it can be immediately adjoining the building. It's something we would encourage schools to use, but as far as that, using that to increase the capacity of bringing students in, I don't think it's a viable solution to increase our capacity, but it's certainly a strategy that they might use.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
thank you. Thank you. With that being said, I'd like to thank all of our Board of Trustees for being here for the vote. We have the motion on the floor, plan framework to allow the administration flexibility to utilize attendance plan 0, 1, or 2 with DHAC designation of high. And at this time, all in favor, please address by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. And at this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Any questions? With that being said, all in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The meeting has been adjourned. Thank you.